Police dog suddenly stops during chase, turns around and leads officers to something that made grown men cry. Officer Mike Sullivan had seen a lot in his 15 years on the force, but nothing could have prepared him for what his K9 partner, Max, would reveal on that crisp autumn evening. What started as a routine pursuit of a suspected drug dealer would end up changing not just his life, but the lives of everyone in the small town of Cedar Grove. The chase began just after sunset, with Max's powerful legs carrying him through the maze of downtown alleyways, his nose locked onto the scent of their target. Sullivan and his fellow officers followed close behind, their flashlight beams cutting through the growing darkness. Max had never failed them before. His German shepherd's intuition had led to countless arrests over their 6 years together. But something was different tonight. Halfway through the pursuit, just as they were closing in on their suspect, Max suddenly froze. His ears perked up, and his entire body tensed in a way Sullivan had never seen before. The senior K9 officer felt his heart skip a beat as his trusted partner let out a low whine, a sound he'd never heard Max make in all their years together. "Max," Sullivan called out, confusion evident in his voice. The other officers halted behind him, their radios crackling with updates about the fleeing suspect. But Max wasn't interested in their original target anymore. Instead, he turned his head toward a narrow passageway between two abandoned warehouses, his amber eyes reflecting an urgency that made Sullivan's skin prickle. "Sir, we're losing the suspect," Officer Rodriguez called out from behind him. "We need to move." Sullivan held up his hand, signaling for silence. Over the years, he'd learned to trust Max's instincts more than any human insight. There was something in the dog's behavior that told him this was more important than their original mission. "Max, what is it, boy?" Sullivan whispered, moving closer to his partner. The German shepherd took off toward the passageway, but this time his movement was different, more measured, almost cautious. Sullivan followed, signaling for Rodriguez and Officer Chen to come with him, while the rest of the team continued the original pursuit. The passage was narrow, with decades of grime coating the brick walls on either side. Their flashlight beams revealed scattered debris and forgotten pieces of machinery, casualties of the neighborhood's industrial past. Max led them deeper into the darkness, his paws silent against the concrete ground. The dog stopped at what appeared to be a rusted metal door, partially hidden behind a collapsed shipping crate. He began pawing at the ground, letting out another of those unusual whines that sent chills down Sullivan's spine. "Chen, help me with this crate," Sullivan ordered, holstering his flashlight. The two officers managed to shift the heavy metal box just enough to access the door. It was padlocked, but the lock was new, suspiciously new compared to the decrepit surroundings. Rodriguez produced a pair of bolt cutters from his tactical belt, and with a quick snap, the lock fell away. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The musty smell of dampness and decay wafted up from below. But there was something else, something that made Max's tail start wagging in an urgent pattern Sullivan had never witnessed before. "Police, anyone down there?" Sullivan called out, his voice echoing off the walls. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, so faint it could have been imagined, came a sound that made every officer's blood run cold, a child's whimper. Max didn't wait for commands. He bounded down the stairs with Sullivan and his fellow officers right behind him. Their flashlight beams revealed a basement room that looked like it had been recently used. Empty food containers were scattered about, and a dirty mattress lay in one corner. And there, huddled behind a stack of molding cardboard boxes, they found them. 3 children, the oldest no more than 7, their faces dirty and frightened, but very much alive. They were the missing Peterson kids who had vanished from their front yard 2 days ago, sending the entire town into a panic. Sullivan felt his throat tighten as Max gently approached the children, his entire demeanor changing from police dog to gentle giant. The youngest girl, Emily, just 4 years old, reached out a tiny hand to touch Max's fur. The dog lay down beside them, creating a protective barrier between the children and the darkness they'd been trapped in. As Rodriguez radioed for medical support and Chen secured the scene, Sullivan watched his partner comforting the trembling children. In that moment, he understood why Max had abandoned their original pursuit. Some things were more important than catching a drug dealer. Some things were worth stopping everything for. The senior K-9 officer felt tears welling up in his eyes as he knelt beside the children, his hand resting on Max's back. This was just the beginning of their story. They still had to find who was responsible, understand how these children ended up here, and help them heal from their ordeal. But for now, in this moment, Sullivan simply thanked whatever twist of fate had given him a partner with the heart and instinct to know when to stop chasing one kind of justice to find another. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and sirens as Cedar Grove's emergency services descended upon the warehouse district. Officer Sullivan sat in the back of an ambulance, watching as paramedics examined the Peterson children. Max hadn't left their side, somehow sensing that his presence brought comfort to the traumatized youngsters. The German Shepherd's usual stern demeanor had melted away, replaced by a gentleness that amazed even his veteran handler. Rebecca Peterson, the children's mother, arrived in a police cruiser, her face streaked with tears and hope. The moment she saw her children, she let out a cry that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood, a sound of such raw emotion that several hardened officers had to turn away to hide their own tears. She rushed forward, gathering all three children in her arms, her body shaking with sobs of relief. "My babies, my precious babies," she whispered over and over, running her hands over their faces as if to convince herself they were real. 7-year-old Tyler, the oldest, tried to maintain a brave face, but his lower lip trembled as he buried his face in his mother's shoulder. 5-year-old Sarah and 4-year-old Emily clung to their mother's sides, their small hands gripping her jacket with an intensity that spoke of their ordeal. Sullivan felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Police Chief Harrison standing beside him. The chief's weathered face showed the strain of the past 48 hours, the sleepless nights, the desperate search, and now finally the miracle they'd all prayed for. "Sullivan," the chief's voice was rough with emotion, "I need to know everything. How did Max—" He trailed off, looking at the German Shepherd who remained vigilant near the reunited family. Sullivan shook his head, still processing the events himself. "I can't explain it, Chief. It was like he knew something we didn't, like he sensed those kids needed him more than we needed to catch our suspect." The chief nodded slowly, watching as crime scene technicians swarmed the warehouse basement, documenting every detail. "The FBI's on their way. This could be connected to other cases they've been tracking. Child trafficking ring operating across state lines." The words hit Sullivan like a physical blow. The thought of more children out there, trapped in similar situations, made his stomach turn. He looked at Max, wondering if his partner somehow understood the larger significance of what they'd uncovered. As if reading his thoughts, Max turned to meet his gaze, those intelligent eyes seeming to say, "This is just the beginning." Local news crews had begun arriving, their cameras capturing the emotional scene. Reporter Sarah Chen from Channel 8 approached Sullivan, microphone in hand, but stopped short when she recognized him. Sarah had covered many of Sullivan and Mac's cases over the years, building a respectful relationship with the K-9 unit. "Mike," she said softly, lowering her microphone, "this isn't just another story, is it? The whole town's been praying for those kids." Sullivan looked at the Peterson family, now being guided into an ambulance for transport to the hospital. Max had finally left their side, returning to sit at attention by his handler's feet. "No, Sarah, it's not just another story. It's about faith, instinct, and—" He reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. "The incredible bond between humans and animals. Sometimes we forget that they can sense things we can't." The scene continued to unfold around them as evidence was collected and statements were taken. Detective Maria Ramirez, the lead investigator on the kidnapping case, emerged from the basement, her face grim but determined. She headed straight for Sullivan. "The kids are too traumatized to tell us much right now," she said in a low voice. "But we found enough evidence down there to suggest this wasn't a random crime. There were photographs of other children, surveillance notes, schedules. This goes deeper than we imagined." Sullivan felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm evening air. He looked at Max, remembering how his partner had abandoned their original pursuit without hesitation. How many other lives might have been saved by that single decision? As the night wore on, the crowd of onlookers grew. Neighbors who had helped search for the Peterson children stood behind the police tape, many crying openly at the miracle they were witnessing. Local shop owners who had posted missing person flyers brought coffee and sandwiches for the first responders. Cedar Grove was a town that took care of its own. Just before midnight, Chief Harrison called Sullivan aside. "The mayor's going to hold a press conference tomorrow morning. She wants you and Max there." He paused, placing a hand on Max's head. "You know, in all my years of law enforcement, I've seen a lot of K-9 units do amazing things, but what happened tonight, that was something special." Sullivan nodded, watching as the last of the crime scene units packed up their equipment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, investigations to pursue, questions to answer, and a community looking for reassurance. But tonight, thanks to a dog's inexplicable instinct and unwavering determination, 3 children were safe in their mother's arms. As Sullivan and Max finally headed to their patrol car, exhausted but fulfilled, a small voice called out. It was Emily Peterson, leaning out of the ambulance window. "Thank you, doggy," she called, her first words since being found. Max's tail wagged once, and Sullivan felt his heart swell with pride. Some victories weren't measured in arrests or convictions. Sometimes they were measured in the tears of joy on a mother's face and the innocent thank you of a child saved from darkness. The morning sun had barely risen over Cedar Grove when the media circus began. Television vans from national networks crowded the police station parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal sunflowers. Officer Sullivan stood in the station's break room, watching Max devour his breakfast while trying to ignore the growing commotion outside. "Ready for your close-up, partner?" Sullivan asked, adjusting his uniform tie. Max looked up from his bowl, tilted his head, and gave a soft woof that made several nearby officers chuckle. Even after last night's events, the German Shepherd remained unchanged, dedicated, focused, and completely unaware of his newfound celebrity status. Chief Harrison appeared in the doorway, his face showing signs of a sleepless night. "Sullivan, got a minute?" He gestured toward his office, and Sullivan followed, Max padding silently behind them. Inside the office, Special Agent Catherine Wells from the FBI was waiting. Her sharp eyes took in both officer and dog with professional interest. "Officer Sullivan, I've spent the morning reviewing your case files from the past 6 years. Your K-9 unit has an impressive record, but what happened last night? That's something else entirely." Sullivan sat down, Max automatically positioning himself between his handler and the door, a protective habit he'd developed over years of service. Max just knew. "I can't explain it any better than that." Agent Wells nodded, spreading photographs across the chief's desk. These were found in the basement. 6 different children, all between the ages of 4 and 8, all photographed at local parks and schools. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The Peterson kidnapping wasn't random. These people had been watching them, planning, and based on what we found, they were planning to move the children last night. The revelation hit Sullivan like a physical blow. If Max hadn't diverted from their original pursuit, if they'd continued chasing the drug suspect, he reached down to touch Max's fur, grounding himself in the present. "There's more," Chief Harrison added, his voice heavy. "The suspect you were originally chasing? We found him an hour ago, dead in his car at the state line. Single gunshot wound. Someone's cleaning house." Before Sullivan could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Rebecca Peterson's voice carried through the door, insisting she needed to speak with Officer Sullivan. Chief Harrison nodded, and Sullivan opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson standing there, looking both exhausted and determined. "Tyler's talking," she said without preamble. He wants to tell you something. Both of you." She looked at Max, who wagged his tail gently at her presence. In the soft-lit interview room, Tyler Peterson sat wrapped in a blanket despite the warm morning. His father, David Peterson, sat beside him, an arm protectively around his son's shoulders. When Max entered the room, Tyler's face lit up with the first real smile anyone had seen since his rescue. Can he sit next to me?" Tyler asked quietly. Sullivan nodded, and Max gently positioned himself beside the boy's chair. Tyler's small hand found its way into Max's fur, and suddenly the words began to flow. And he told them about the man who had offered to show them a puppy, about the basement and the scary voices he'd heard at night, about the other children he'd seen in photographs the bad men looked at. But most importantly, he told them about the woman with the red shoes who had brought them food. Agent Wells leaned forward. Red shoes! Are you sure about that, Tyler? The boy nodded. She was nice to us. She said she was sorry and that she would try to help. I heard her arguing with the bad men the night before the police dog found us. Sullivan exchanged glances with Agent Wells. The woman could be their key to unraveling the entire operation. As if sensing the importance of the moment, Max pressed closer to Tyler, offering silent support as the boy continued his story. Outside the interview room, the station buzzed with activity. The mayor's press conference was set to begin in an hour, and FBI analysts were arriving with equipment to set up a command center. Cedar Grove's small police force was about to become the center of a major federal investigation. Detective Ramirez caught Sullivan as he left the interview room. The evidence teams found something else, she said, pulling him aside. Hidden camera footage from the warehouse. They were watching the K-9 patrols, learning your routines. That's why they chose that location. They thought they knew when it would be safe. They never counted on Max's intuition. Sullivan felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't just criminals. They were organized, methodical, and had been hiding right under their noses. How many other cities had similar operations? How many other children were waiting to be found? As if sensing his handler's distress, Max pressed against Sullivan's leg, offering the same comfort he'd given Tyler. Sullivan looked down at his partner, seeing not just a police dog, but a guardian angel in fur. One who had not only saved 3 children, but had possibly helped uncover a network that had been preying on society's most vulnerable. The mayor's assistant appeared, clipboard in hand. Officer Sullivan, they're ready for you and Max in the press room. As they walked toward the gathering of cameras and reporters, Sullivan realized this wasn't just about one night's miracle anymore. This was about shining a light into the darkness, about giving hope to other searching families, and about showing the world that sometimes the greatest heroes walked on 4 legs, guided by a heart that could sense what human eyes couldn't see. Max, for his part, simply walked beside his partner, ready as always to serve, protect, and follow wherever duty and his remarkable instincts might lead them next. The police station's press room had never held so many people. Local reporters who'd covered Cedar Grove's community events for years found themselves shoulder to shoulder with journalists from national networks. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning as Officer Sullivan and Max took their places beside the podium, where Mayor Grace Chen stood ready to address the nation. Max sat at perfect attention, his bearing regal despite the chaos around him. Sullivan noticed how his partner's eyes constantly scanned the crowd, ever vigilant, ever protective. Even here, surrounded by journalists and photographers, the German Shepherd remained focused on his duty. Yesterday, Mayor Chen began, her voice steady and clear, our community witnessed what I can only describe as a miracle. But it wasn't the kind of miracle that descends from heaven. It was the kind that comes from the unshakable bond between a police officer and his canine partner, from years of trust and training, and from a dog's extraordinary instinct to protect those in need. As the mayor spoke, Sullivan's mind wandered to the evidence they'd uncovered that morning. Agent Wells and her team had been analyzing the surveillance photos found in the basement, cross-referencing them with missing persons cases across 3 states. The numbers were staggering, the implications horrifying. His attention snapped back to the present as he heard his name. Officer Sullivan, would you please step forward? Sullivan approached the podium, Max naturally falling into step beside him. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing what would become iconic images of man and dog facing the world together. Officer Sullivan, a reporter called out, can you walk us through what happened when Max diverted from your original pursuit? Sullivan looked down at his partner before responding. In our 6 years together, I've learned to trust Max's instincts without question. When he stopped and changed direction, I knew it had to be for something important. What I didn't know was that his decision would save not just the Peterson children, but potentially dozens more. The room erupted with questions, but Chief Harrison stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. At this time, we can confirm that this case has led to the discovery of an organized child trafficking network operating across multiple states. The FBI has taken the lead in the investigation. But I want to be clear. This discovery began with one dog's extraordinary instinct and one officer's trust in his partner. In the back of the room, Sullivan spotted Rebecca Peterson with Tyler. The boy had insisted on attending, wanting to see Max again. When the German Shepherd noticed them, his tail wagged once, drawing smiles from the hardened journalists who caught the gesture. Agent Wells took the podium next, her FBI badge gleaming under the lights. We're establishing a dedicated task force based here in Cedar Grove. Officers Sullivan and Max will be instrumental in this operation, as their unique capabilities have already proven invaluable. But we need the public's help as well. She held up an artist's sketch of a woman wearing distinctive red shoes. This person of interest may have crucial information. If anyone recognizes her, please contact our hotline. She may be the key to preventing other families from experiencing the nightmare the Petersons endured. As the press conference continued, Sullivan felt his phone vibrate. Detective Ramirez had sent him a message. Security camera footage from gas station 3 miles from warehouse. Woman in red shoes spotted 30 minutes ago. Moving in. Sullivan's heart rate quickened, but he maintained his composed expression for the cameras. Max, however, sensed his tension and shifted slightly closer to him. The questions from reporters continued, ranging from technical details about K-9 training to emotional inquiries about the children's recovery. Through it all, Max remained a steady presence, his calm demeanor somehow reassuring everyone in the room that as long as he was on duty, there was hope. Near the end of the conference, a veteran reporter from the Cedar Grove Gazette stood up. Officer Sullivan, there's talk of commendations, medals, even a Hollywood movie deal. But watching Max today, he seems unchanged by all this attention. What do you think is going through his mind? Sullivan smiled, reaching down to rest his hand on Max's head. Max doesn't care about medals or movies. To him, this was just another day of doing what he was born to do, protecting people, especially those who can't protect themselves. And tomorrow he'll get up and do it all again, not for glory or recognition, but because that's who he is. The press conference was winding down when Sullivan's phone buzzed again. This time it was Chief Harrison. Need you and Max now. Ramirez found her. Woman in red shoes, willing to talk, but only to the officer with the dog who saved those kids. As Sullivan and Max slipped out of the press room, they could hear Mayor Chen announcing the creation of a new K-9 training facility to be built in Cedar Grove, specializing in rescue operations and counter-trafficking techniques. The mayor's voice faded behind them as they rushed toward their patrol car, ready to pursue another lead, to shine light into another dark corner. Max jumped into the back seat, alert and ready. Looking at his partner in the rearview mirror, Sullivan felt a surge of pride and purpose. The headlines would call them heroes, but the real story wasn't about heroism. It was about partnership, trust, and the simple truth that sometimes the purest hearts came wrapped in fur, guided by instincts humans were only beginning to understand. As they pulled out of the parking lot, lights flashing but sirens silent, Sullivan knew they were heading toward another chapter in this unfolding story. The woman in red shoes waited somewhere ahead, holding pieces of a puzzle that could save more lives. And Max, as always, was ready to help put those pieces together. Officers Sullivan and Max pulled up to Denny's Diner on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, an unlikely place for such a crucial meeting. Detective Ramirez stood outside, her unmarked car parked discreetly behind the restaurant. Inside, through the rain-streaked windows, Sullivan could make out Agent Wells sitting across from a woman in a worn denim jacket. A pair of red shoes peeked out from beneath the table. She's scared, Ramirez said quietly as Sullivan approached. Says she's been trying to help the kids for months, gathering evidence. When she heard about Max finding the Peterson children, she knew it was time. Max's ears perked up at the mention of his name, but his eyes remained fixed on the diner's entrance. Sullivan recognized his partner's posture, alert but not tense, sensing no immediate threat. Inside, the woman looked up as they approached. Her face bore the marks of someone who hadn't slept in days, but her eyes lit up at the sight of Max. So you're the one, she whispered. You're the one who changed everything. Her name was Margaret Collins, a former social worker who had infiltrated the trafficking ring 6 months ago after recognizing one of her former cases among the missing children. She had been gathering evidence, names, locations, all while trying to keep the children safe until help could arrive. I couldn't save them all at once, she explained, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. They would have just moved the others before anyone could reach them. But I documented everything. She slid a phone across the table to Agent Wells. It's all there. The entire network, from Cedar Grove to Chicago. Names, dates, locations, and the children. So many children. As Margaret talked, Max moved closer to her, resting his head gently on her lap. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes. When I heard how you found those kids, how you just knew. She stroked Max's fur with trembling fingers. I knew God had finally answered my prayers. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. FBI tactical teams moved simultaneously across 3 states, coordinating their raids down to the second. Sullivan and Max participated in 2 of the Cedar Grove operations, their experience with the Peterson rescue proving invaluable. By Sunday evening, the results were beyond anything they could have hoped for. 34 children rescued, 22 arrests, 3 major trafficking rings dismantled, and it had all started with one dog's inexplicable decision to turn away from a routine chase. A week later, Cedar Grove's town square was packed for a ceremony unlike any in its history. The mayor was there, along with FBI officials, news crews, and dozens of families reunited with their children. But the real guests of honor were a German shepherd and his handler. Tyler Peterson stood proudly next to Max, wearing a custom-made K9 unit baseball cap. His sisters, Sarah and Emily, sat nearby with their parents, all of them wearing T-shirts bearing Max's photo and the words, "Our guardian angel has 4 paws." Margaret Collins was there too, now under witness protection, but granted special permission to attend. She had become an essential part of the ongoing investigation, her detailed records leading to more arrests every day. As Sullivan watched Max interact with the children, so gentle despite his impressive size and training, he remembered something Margaret had told them at the diner. Sometimes the purest souls come to us in unexpected forms. They remind us that love and instinct can pierce any darkness, break any chains. The ceremony itself was brief but powerful. Max received the Department of Justice's Distinguished Service Medal, the first K9 officer in history to be so honored. But it was the smaller medal, presented by Tyler Peterson, that brought tears to Sullivan's eyes. A simple bronze disc engraved with the words, "For hearing the cries others couldn't hear." That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the cameras had gone, Sullivan took Max for their usual patrol. They passed the warehouse where it had all started, now adorned with flowers and notes of thanks from the community. Max paused briefly, sniffing the air, before continuing his rounds. "You know, partner," Sullivan said as they walked beneath the setting sun, "they're calling you a hero. There's talk of books, documentaries, even that Hollywood movie." He chuckled. "But I know you don't care about any of that." Max looked up at him with those soulful eyes that had seen both humanity's darkness and its light. "You just knew those kids needed help, didn't you? Simple as that. And you'll do it again tomorrow and the next day, because that's who you are." As if in answer, Max pressed closer to Sullivan's side as they continued their patrol. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the twilight sky. Somewhere out there, 34 children were safe in their beds tonight. Somewhere, other K9 units were being trained to recognize the signs Max had somehow known instinctively. And somewhere, other Margaret Collinses were finding the courage to step forward, inspired by a dog who had shown them that one act of bravery could light a path through the darkest night. Sullivan felt Max's steady presence beside him and smiled. Some heroes wore badges, some wore red shoes, and some wore fur and asked for nothing more than a pat on the head and the chance to make the world a little safer, one mysterious instinct at a time.